The wind howled through the deserted streets, biting at every exposed inch of skin. Behind the shelter's rusted gates, a man paused, his breath fogging in the bitter air. Before him stood a trembling German shepherd, bruised and broken, its haunted eyes staring back. No one had come for this dog, until now. Tom had never imagined that one act of kindness would spiral into a battle that tested his very soul. As he knelt down to meet the eyes of the wounded dog, something shifted inside him. This was no ordinary rescue. This would force him to confront his own past, his deepest regrets. Tom had once been a man without a future. Years ago he had made a reckless decision, a momentary lapse in judgment that cost him his freedom. He had served time for a crime that still haunted him, his past shadowing his every step. The criminal record followed him everywhere, making it nearly impossible to find work. His reputation was marred, his chances of redemption slim. But he didn't give up. Tom found his second chance at an animal shelter, a place where he could prove that even those who had stumbled could still make a difference. He started as a janitor, cleaning the kennels, scrubbing floors, and doing whatever menial task was required. There was no glory in it, no spotlight on his efforts, but it was enough. At least here, in the world of animals, he could escape the whispers of the world. Here, he wasn't the convict. He was just Tom, the quiet man who spent his days caring for forgotten dogs. Every dog he met was a reminder of what he'd lost, but also of the chance for a new beginning. He clung to the hope that his work could one day be more than just a penance. It could be his redemption. The shelter was meant to be a sanctuary, a place of refuge for animals abandoned and mistreated by their owners. But behind its welcoming facade, the shelter was struggling to survive, struggling to care for the increasing number of animals left at its doorstep. The staff, though well-intentioned, were overwhelmed, and resources were always stretched thin. The building itself, once bright and full of hope, now seemed to reflect the weariness that had settled into its walls. Tom quickly learned that this was no fairy tale. The shelter wasn't perfect, it wasn't the paradise he had imagined when he first started. Still, it was a job, a way to put food on the table and maybe, just maybe, make up for the wrongs he'd done. The animals were his focus. He cared for them the best he could, even if the shelter didn't always have the resources to give them what they truly needed. But despite the flaws, Tom saw the potential for something more. He saw the possibility of making the place better, of giving these animals a real chance at a better life. If only the shelter could provide more than the bare minimum. If only it could live up to the ideal of truly saving those who needed it most. It was a night like any other, cold and biting as Tom locked up the shelter. The staff had left for the day, and the streets were eerily quiet. Tom tugged his jacket tighter around his shoulders and began to head to his car. But then, a soft, desperate whimper broke the silence. It was faint, carried by the wind, but unmistakable. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He followed the sound, his boots crunching on the gravel path, and turned the corner behind the shelter. There, hunched in the shadows, was a German shepherd, so thin it seemed to melt into the concrete, its body trembling uncontrollably. The dog's fur was matted and scarred, a patchwork of old wounds and new injuries. His eyes, wide with terror, looked directly at Tom, pleading for help. Tom froze. The dog's fear was palpable. This wasn't just an abandoned animal. This was a creature that had been broken, possibly by humans. But there was still a flicker of hope in those eyes, a silent cry for mercy. Without thinking, Tom approached the animal slowly, lowering his body to be less intimidating. The dog didn't flinch, didn't pull away, it simply watched him. With shaky hands, Tom gently untied the rope that bound the dog to a rusted pole. The animal's body sagged, too weak to stand on its own. Tom lifted the dog carefully, cradling it against his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he knew nothing was ever truly that simple. Tom's hands shook as he carefully placed the dog in the passenger seat of his car, securing him with the seatbelt. The air in the car was thick with the smell of wet fur and fear, and Tom could feel the dog's heart pounding against his chest. His mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. He was just supposed to clean up, do his shift, and go home. But somehow, this dog had become more than just another stray. The desperation in his eyes, the fragility of his body, spoke volumes. No one had come for him, not even the shelter, not even his own kind. Tom glanced at the dog, whose head lay against the seat, exhausted but still alert. He knew what it meant to be abandoned, to feel as though you were forgotten. The shelter might have been his job, but this dog, this wounded animal, was something more. This was personal. Tom had spent his life trying to bury his own shame. But now, as the dog's gentle breath filled the space between them, Tom knew he couldn't walk away from this. He had seen the dark side of humanity, the mistakes that left you with nothing. And yet, here he was, about to make a decision that could change everything. This was his chance to make a real difference, not just for the dog, but for himself. As the car's engine hummed to life, Tom's voice broke the silence. "Let's get you warm. You're not alone anymore." And in that moment, Tom knew there was no turning back. The first few days with Rex were quiet. Tom fed him, gave him water, and watched as the dog lay still in his apartment, barely moving except for the occasional shiver. But Tom could tell there was something deeper beneath the surface, a past Rex couldn't outrun. It wasn't just the physical scars that marked his body. It was the way he flinched at every sudden movement, the way his eyes darted around in fear as if anticipating the next blow. Tom didn't understand it at first. He assumed Rex had simply been abandoned by an uncaring owner. But as the days passed, he began to notice things that didn't add up. Rex would freeze when loud noises hit, his muscles would tense when Tom reached for him, and his body would tremble at the sight of certain objects. Objects that Tom had never considered dangerous before. A collar, a leash, the sound of metal clinking. One afternoon, after taking Rex to the vet for a routine checkup, Tom encountered a man who looked at Rex with recognition. The man's eyes widened and he approached cautiously. "That dog," the man said, his voice thick with disdain. "He was a fighter, a champion, until he was dumped. You don't see dogs like him anymore, not unless you're in the business." The truth hit Tom like a punch in the stomach. Rex wasn't just abandoned, he had been forced into the brutal world of underground dogfighting. Tom felt the weight of this new knowledge crush him. Rex wasn't just a victim of neglect, he was a product of something far more sinister. Tom felt his world shift. He had thought Rex was just another stray, abandoned and left to fend for himself. But now, knowing the truth, everything felt different. Rex wasn't just a victim of neglect, he was a victim of cruelty, of a system that used animals for sport, for profit. The realization settled heavily in Tom's chest, a weight he couldn't shake off. He had rescued Rex because he saw a dog in need, a life worth saving. But now he was faced with the question, could Rex truly recover from a past so violent, so full of betrayal? How could Tom, someone haunted by his own past mistakes, help a dog who had suffered the worst humanity had to offer? Every time Rex flinched, every time he cowered from Tom's touch, the doubt gnawed at Tom's confidence. Was it possible to undo years of abuse? Could Rex ever learn to trust again? Tom was determined to try, but he couldn't ignore the quiet voice inside him that whispered, "What if you can't save him?" As the days turned into weeks, Tom watched Rex's gradual transformation with a mixture of hope and fear. He would wag his tail for a moment, let Tom pet him for a second longer before pulling away. But then the familiar signs of fear would return, the stiff posture, the wild-eyed panic. And every time Tom couldn't help but wonder, was he just delaying the inevitable? Could a dog like Rex ever truly heal? But Tom knew one thing for sure, he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not on Rex. Not on himself. Tom's days at the shelter had grown increasingly difficult. The more time he spent caring for Rex, the more he realized that there was something deeply wrong with the place he had once trusted. It wasn't just the lack of resources or the overcrowded kennels. It was something darker, something far more sinister. One evening, while sorting through a stack of papers in the back office, Tom overheard a conversation between two senior staff members. Their voices were hushed, but Tom could hear the tension in the air. He caught snippets of words that made his blood run cold: breeding, fighting rings, and contracts. Curious, Tom followed them as they moved into the storage room. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the conversation that unfolded before him was something he would never forget. The shelter, this supposed haven for animals, was a front. It wasn't just providing care, it was secretly involved in a network that supplied dogs to underground fighting rings. Dogs like Rex, who had been trained to fight, to survive in a world where their only value was in how well they could kill, were bought and sold like property. Tom's stomach churned. The very people he had worked alongside, the ones he had trusted, were part of a system that exploited animals for profit. He felt the weight of his decision to bring Rex home crash down on him. Was he unknowingly helping the same system he had hoped to escape? How many other animals were caught in this web of exploitation? He knew now that he couldn't stay silent, not with Rex at his side. The discovery of the shelter's dark secret weighed heavily on Tom's conscience. His stomach churned every time he thought about the animals still locked behind the shelter's walls, pawns in a game that he had never fully understood. Rex was just the beginning. What else was the shelter hiding? How many other animals had been forced into a life of suffering, their only worth measured in pain and fear? And here was Tom, an ex-convict, trying to right his wrongs, being sucked into a world of corruption and cruelty once again. The dilemma was agonizing. Tom had spent years trying to leave behind the mistakes of his past, and now he found himself in the middle of something far worse. He knew what he had to do: expose the shelter's illegal dealings, stop the trafficking of animals, and bring down the people behind it. But doing so meant risking everything: his job, his freedom, his safety. The people responsible for the shelter's operations were powerful, with ties that ran deep. One wrong move, and Tom could be next on their list. But then there was Rex. Every time Tom looked at him, he saw the vulnerability, the terror that still lingered behind those eyes. Rex had already been through so much, and Tom couldn't let him, or any other animal, be sacrificed for the sake of profit. Tom knew that standing up for what was right wasn't going to be easy. But for Rex, and for the other animals who deserved better, he had no choice. He had to fight, no matter the cost. Tom's decision to expose the shelter's illegal activities brought him face to face with a terrifying reality. He had quietly gathered evidence over the course of several weeks, hidden documents, emails, and photographs that detailed the shelter's role in the underground dogfighting network. But exposing it was not going to be simple. There were powerful people involved, people who would stop at nothing to protect their empire of cruelty. One evening, after another long shift, Tom was called into the office of his supervisor, Greg Thompson, a man who had always seemed kind but distant. The office was dimly lit, the only sound the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. As soon as Tom walked in, Greg's face shifted from neutral to something more guarded, something Tom had never seen before. "You've been snooping around, Tom," Greg said, his voice cold and controlled. "I can see it in your eyes. You've found something, haven't you?" Tom froze. The pit in his stomach deepened. He didn't know how much Greg knew, but the look in his eyes told him that Greg wasn't blind to Tom's investigation. He had been careful, too careful, he thought now. Greg leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk, his gaze sharp. "If you go public with this, Tom, you'll regret it. I won't let you tear this place down. Not without a fight." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Tom's heart raced, but his resolve didn't waver. This wasn't just about the shelter anymore. This was about taking down a system built on violence, and he wasn't going to back down. The stakes were higher than ever now. Tom had made the decision to expose the shelter's corruption, but as the confrontation with Greg showed, the consequences were far-reaching. The people behind the illegal activities had connections, power, and the will to silence anyone who threatened their operation. Tom knew that his every move was being watched, and every decision carried weight. But he wasn't alone anymore. Rex, though still a shell of the confident dog he could have been, was proving to be a silent force in this fight. Tom had always seen Rex as a dog in need of saving, but now he was beginning to understand just how much Rex was capable of saving him in return. It was Rex's quiet strength that gave Tom the courage to continue. The dog had been through the worst of humanity, yet he still had the will to survive, to trust again. It was a trust Tom had been slowly earning, and in those small moments when Rex would lean into him or nudge his hand, Tom found solace. But things had escalated faster than Tom anticipated. The threats were no longer subtle. One evening, as Tom was on his way to his car, he saw a shadowy figure watching him from across the street. Rex immediately tensed, growling low in his throat, a sound Tom hadn't heard before. It was the first time Rex had shown that level of protectiveness since Tom brought him home. In that moment, Tom realized Rex wasn't just a survivor, he was a warrior, and together, they were about to fight back against everything that had broken them both. The days that followed the confrontation with Greg were a blur of tension and fear. Tom had gone public with the truth, and the fallout was immediate. The shelter's involvement in the underground dogfighting ring became a headline story, drawing the attention of local authorities, animal rights groups, and the public. But as the investigation took off, Tom found himself facing a new set of challenges. The people behind the operation were not the kind to be easily toppled. Threats loomed large, both against Tom and the animals he had tried so hard to protect. Tom's world became a constant cycle of sleepless nights, monitoring the news for updates and hiding out when he knew the people involved were coming closer to finding him. The pressure weighed heavily on him. He had exposed the truth, but in doing so, he had also put a target on his back. Meanwhile, Rex was becoming more than just a companion in this fight. The dog, who had once cowered in fear at the slightest sound, was now a source of unexpected strength. Rex's protective instincts had kicked in fully, and he stood by Tom's side as though he understood the gravity of the situation. The bond between them had deepened in a way that words couldn't express. But the emotional cost of this fight was high. Every victory came with the knowledge that it wasn't over yet. The battle for justice was far from won, and the true test was yet to come. The shelter might be shut down, but the forces behind it were still out there, waiting for their next move. Tom couldn't rest. Not yet. Despite the chaos, Tom and Rex had managed to find brief moments of peace. The shelter had been shut down, the corrupt staff arrested, and the dogs liberated from the underground fighting ring. But the battle had come at a price. The emotional toll was overwhelming. Tom had put everything on the line, his job, his safety, and his peace of mind. But in the end, it had been worth it. The animals were free, and the truth had been revealed. Tom and Rex, now inseparable, found solace in each other's company. The apartment, once filled with uncertainty and tension, was now a place of quiet recovery. Rex, whose body had been scarred by violence, was beginning to show signs of trust and joy again. He'd become more than just the dog Tom had rescued. He had become the embodiment of the resilience that Tom was starting to reclaim within himself. Yet, as much as Tom wanted to believe that everything was behind him, he knew the journey was far from over. His past, the crimes, the guilt, the years he had spent running from who he once was, couldn't be undone. But it didn't define him anymore. He had made choices, both good and bad, but he had fought for what was right, not just for Rex, but for the others who couldn't fight for themselves. Redemption wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And with Rex by his side, Tom was starting to understand that it wasn't about erasing the past, it was about moving forward. Together they had a future, one full of healing and second chances. As the days turned into weeks, Tom and Rex settled into a new rhythm. The quiet apartment was no longer filled with the weight of constant fear, but with a newfound sense of peace. Tom had been offered a position at a legitimate animal rescue organization, a fresh start that allowed him to put his past behind him and focus on what truly mattered, giving animals a voice and a future. But Tom knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The memories of his past mistakes would always be there, lingering in the background, reminding him of the man he used to be. Rex, with his broken past, was proof that healing was possible. But it was a process, one that required patience, trust, and time. Together, they were beginning to rebuild their lives, one step at a time. Tom looked at Rex and saw more than just the scars of the past. He saw hope, resilience, and the possibility of something better. The future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape, together. Tom knew that the road to redemption wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about embracing the uncertainty of the future and finding strength in the unknown. The shelter's closure had brought justice, but it had also opened up a deeper wound in Tom. His past would always be a shadow, and he couldn't change that. But as he looked at Rex, he understood something profound. Maybe they were both broken, but they weren't beyond repair. Rex had become a symbol of hope for Tom, not because of his healing, but because of his ability to move forward despite everything that had happened. He didn't trust the world yet, but he was willing to try. Tom felt that same willingness inside himself, a quiet determination to move beyond his past mistakes, to make something better, even if it took time. The future wasn't clear, but for the first time in a long while, Tom had hope. Hope that, together, they could build a new life. As the sun set behind their small apartment, Tom sat beside Rex on the porch, the weight of their journey pressing into him. They had both been broken, abandoned, and misunderstood, but now they had each other. Rex had shown him that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about accepting it and choosing to move forward. Tom had fought for Rex, and in return, Rex had fought for him. They had both healed, piece by piece, and were learning to live with their scars. The world wasn't perfect, but together they had found something beautiful. Hope, and that was enough.